Welcome to the Value Add Podcast. I'm Eitan Goldstein, and I'm excited to have on Richard Lake, founding principal and partner at Roadside Development. Richard, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I'd love to, before we jump into, what you're working on at Roadside, I would love to hear a little bit about your background, earlier life work experiences, and how you got into commercial real estate.
Sure. Happy to. So I am the youngest of four boys.
Nice.
My father and mother grew up in Brooklyn and they moved to DC before I was born. And I kind of grew up in DC for pretty much most of my life and in the close-in suburbs. And my father owned a few restaurants, but he owned one that was pretty famous called the Zebra Room in Washington, D.C. And and so that's kind of how I got interested in retail. My whole family was in retail. I had grandparents who owned grocery stores. I had an uncle who owned dry cleaners. I had an aunt and uncle who owned shoe stores. So it was kind of like always kind of in my blood. But when I went to college, I went to school at Boston University and I took a finance class, a real estate finance class, and my professor was a developer. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world when he asked us to go look at one of his projects. And I'm like, wait. They let you do this? You get to kind of go over the block and kind of change it and change the environment. I thought that was so cool. So I was working for a bond company called Willoughby Pollock while I was at school, and I was going to become a bond trader and go to New York. And my whole idea was to go to New York, crush it there, and then use that to buy real estate because I really thought that was the coolest thing.
Right.
Um, that ended up not doing that. I ended up coming back and working for a local brokerage company, not small, but a local brokerage company called Smithy Braden. And Smithy Braden was operated by a gentleman named Jim Eichberg, who was infamous in DC as being one of the more straightforward, thoughtful business practitioners in the real estate space. And I was in an office, and they were an office company. They managed millions of square feet of office. They were one of the largest leasing of office, but they did very little of any retail. So I created a retail platform with the gentleman who hired me, this guy Armin Spikel, who was in the middle of his career selling shopping centers, and he wanted to lease them, thinking he could make more money if they were leased. So he brought this young guy in back in 1984, and I started and kind of created a path, and we created a company called the Retail Group, and then after that, Madison Retail Group, when we partnered up with Madison Marquette, who was a client of ours. But during all that, I had a client who wanted us to build a shopping center for them. So I brought in an old client of mine, Todd Weiss, and the three of us built this shopping center. And then CVS is one of the tenants. It's just amazing how things
Crazy.
you give a moose a muffin, right? It just how it transcends. And the CVS real estate rep, this guy Joe Monaco, who ran the real estate in this region, just really just hit it off. And he said, "Hey, how would you like to be a preferred developer?" And I said, "Sure," not knowing what the hell that was, and nor did they. So we went up to Woonsocket and helped cultivate their preferred development program. And we were their preferred developer in the Washington metropolitan area. And we did a lot, like we built like 17 CVSs, and that
Wow.
got us started in building. And the reason why our name is Roadside, the three of us were together, and Armin goes, "Well, we build things along the road. Why don't we just call ourselves Roadside Development?" And 25 years later, here we are.
Still works.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing. I mean, in general, I love stories and storytelling, and I think hearing about how people got to where they are is always fascinating. Did your father own the real estate that he was using for the restaurant?
No, no, much to my chagrin. So, he owned that restaurant for 35 years, and I got out of college, fresh with my diploma, and his lease was coming up, and he's like, "Oh, well, you're going to come into the restaurant?" I go, "No, I'm not going to come to the restaurant." We all worked there, did incredible. I mean, he was an amazing individual. But so I said, Dad, go get a 20-year lease. He said, what? What?
Right.
What? If you're not coming in, why would I need a 20-year lease? I said, we're going to sell your lease. I said, go get a long-term lease because right now, without a lease, you have your business has no value. And so we went and got a 10-year lease with two 5-year options, and we sold his business. We sold his lease, basically.
That's awesome. And
Yeah, so it was a way to help my father, my mother to kind of, well, my mother never retired, but it kind of helped my father at least, retire. So
wow.
that's what we worked on. And so I think his, paying for my education, he got a return on it, let's say. So,
I think that's every child's dream to be able to do that for their parents. I mean, hopefully, if the parents need it, I mean, that's amazing. You worked in the restaurant when you were younger?
oh yeah, I think my first early remembrances I was 5, and they stocked a bunch of beer boxes at the dishwashing station, and they let me wash all the dishes. When your father owns a business or your mother owns a business, you do anything, right? No
For sure.
job is is beneath anything. So I cleaned, I bussed tables, I bartended, I cooked, I waited, along with my brothers. And I think,
Wow.
quite frankly, 10 of our family members, extended family members, had worked at the Zebra.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it was one of those places where my dad just knew everybody. And
So it
people like
sounds like,
J.W. Marriott come in.
wow.
You had the Kennedys, you had John Anderson headed up his independent campaign out of there. He was infamous because he kicked Carl Albert and his wife out of the restaurant when he was
Oh,
Speaker of the
wow.
House because
Wow.
Carl was getting drunk and crashing his car.
Oh my
So my
gosh.
father stopped, barred him from the place. It's interesting. It was one of those. If you're a DC guy, you knew it. It was just one of those places. So
That's pretty awesome. I would imagine. I mean, I actually worked when I was younger in a restaurant. It was not my father's restaurant, and I wasn't 5 either. But I know for myself, and I would imagine, and like to hear if it was the same for you. But at the very least, I think the experience you get of having to make a customer happy, and that the customer's always right, and that as much as they're paying you, you're really working for them, and you really want them to come back and trying to make it the best experience possible.
you're 100% correct. Well, the thing that I always we told my wife and I told our kids it is the best experience you can have for a number of reasons. One, it gives you a perspective of how hard people have to work in a
Right.
lot of ways. You can't be an isolator. You have to be a team player because you're never going to get the food for your customers, and you have to be an advocate for your customers. And so it gives you great broad training. So I have a lot of respect for people. I think all young people should work in the service industry at some point, or do other things that give back to society. But one of the things that I feel like we've lost is we lose sight of how many people in our society contribute to our daily life.
For sure.
And if you have a good perspective of everyone else and have their day, and you understand that what they're doing is enhancing your experience, be it a server, be it
100%. Right.
someone cleaning your table, be it someone fixing roads or making sure power comes to your house when you want to flip a switch. If we break those barriers and we start thinking as a society that all these people have worth, and they do, and we have a little bit better understanding and appreciation of them, I think we'd be a much better off society. So I think restaurants kind of like that microcosm of all those pieces and parts because they have to
Right.
work together.
Oh, for sure. I love that. I love that idea. I think that's beautiful. I remember when I was dating, I remember hearing that someone say, watch how the person treats people that are working in service jobs. And I think it's very true. Like, obviously, we always want to treat people, of course, our family even better than that. But at the very least, to make sure that, people are showing appreciation and gratitude and dealing with people the right way. Yeah, I love that. I think shifting towards more present day your focus today at Roadside. So, what are you guys working on? What are you excited about?
So, we're in the real estate industry, so you can get excited by just so much. So we're using this period of time with interest rates and the capital markets a little bit in disarray. We're using this time to get ready for the next run, and so we've teed up probably about $1 billion of additional
Mm,
development in our pipeline. Properties either that we own or properties that we are acquiring to really get ourselves ready when the capital markets free back up. So we have a pretty sizable project on a property that we acquired during this downturn in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is kind of my roots. Going kind of most of us, so several of us in our team and grew up in Silver Spring. And we bought an old tasty diner and an old bank, and we've gotten approval to build about 500 units on top of a grocery store.
nice.
Um,
Wow.
and so we're taking it through its process right now and using this time to get it ready. We've brought in a local developer, another partner, Wilkes
Nice.
Company, to be our co-GP. And Sandy, Wilkes, and Burke, they have a similar philosophy that we do about build and hold, not to be a merchant builder. We've really never wanted to be or try to be a merchant developer. We like to build and hold and operate
Right.
the properties, and this is an opportunity for us to add this to our portfolio. So we hope to start construction next year. So that one we're pretty excited about. We're almost through DDs with our architect,
Nice.
and
Wow.
we think that this is the right time to get ready, and we think the market will meet us hopefully sometime next year, and we'll be able to
Sure.
start construction. And then we have several of the properties around DC and Maryland and Virginia that we already own that we're looking at taking off the shelf and redeveloping.
Nice.
And then the next thing that we're really excited about is that we're going to be entering into a partnership with an Israeli company, which I can't announce yet, but to go out and go back to our roots and to buy existing shopping centers up and down the East Coast and look at a program of acquire, use management and leasing skills or relationships with tenants to bring out more value and then to turn around and to liquidate those properties in a 5 to 7 year period, which
Wow.
is something we did a long time ago. I've done a lot of that work before, about 20 some odd grocery stores. So we have a really strong relationship with those retailers. And we think that even though retail has went through its cycle, a while ago, it still has some more to go. And so we still think there's some really good opportunities out there to come in and right size some of these properties.
Well, it's busy, and I think this is a very great time to tee up projects. As you mentioned, it's hard to start on as many projects right now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's when other people are sleeping, sometimes it's a great opportunity to line up those projects from the capital markets align. And you started off in retail as you shared earlier, and you haven't left retail, but you've also added other asset classes, and you mentioned this large multifamily and I guess mixed use project. How would you compare the developing and operating of multifamily compared to retail, which was, your start in the
Yeah.
business?
Well, they're different, obviously, right? The first thing you have to recognize is that one product people sleep there, that's their home, and the other product people they commerce there, they do
Right.
they own their business there. So, but what we kind of like to feel like we bring retail, we use retail to kind of enhance the place, the experience. So if you walk through some of our mixed use projects like City Ridge or City Market, some larger projects, you will see a little bit more mercantile attitude even in our amenity space. We
Interesting.
don't build an amenity space just to be one purpose, one dimension. We build that amenity space to actually capture whatever we can do. So we throw 40 concerts a year in our properties.
Wow.
And we create this kind of ambiance and experience. When we go to our retailers that we bring into these properties, like I'll give you an example. I'm looking across the street at City Ridge right now, and Equinox is doing a Mommy and Me event on the front lawn. And we tell Equinox, use the entire canvas. Don't just think of yourself inside your premises. Think of yourself as the entire canvas is your world. And so we like creating that kind of energy integration. And I think that enhances the experience of the resident. And so we take that a very promotional attitude. We built a pool club on top of the roof where Michael Mina is operating a restaurant. And then we have this incredible pool that is like a social club that sits on top of one of our commercial roofs that has this
Wow, that's
incredible
awesome.
view. So it's taking that, leaning in and taking, not being afraid of those operational things and saying, look, we can make this experience a little bit better, a little bit more unique. And so as residential is moving to more hospitality, um,
Right.
we think we're in a really good space to understand the hospitality and cultivating that customer relationship. So when we look at our shop, when we look at our projects, we think of the customer first. We're kind of like that Nordstrom approach where the customer is really what we're focusing on. So both on the resident and also on our commercial customers. So we put a urban Wegmans, call it urban,
Right.
84,000 square foot Wegmans underneath an historic building. And the first thing we did is figure out loading. The first thing we did is sit and spend time understanding how the store would operate. How would you bring merchandise in? How do you shield that from the customer? How do you enhance the experience of people living on top of a store? Because you want to live on top of a
Yeah.
grocery store, but you don't want to be reminded that you live on top of a grocery store every time you're there. You don't want to smell it. You don't want to fight their trucks. You don't want to fight their customers. So we always think about our projects as a degree of separation. And so we got into the multifamily because we bought an historic building, an old Heckinger's, but it was a Sears department store in DC. And we had an idea to create residential on top. It had a bunch of additional density FAR, sat on top of the metro. And we went to a bunch of residential guys and trying to sell them the air rights. And it was clear they had no respect. A lot of them didn't have any respect for the retail on the first floor. They only were interested in what they were going to create and when they were going to create it. And I came back to the team and I said, we're going to go to school. We're going to learn how to do residential. And so that's what we did. We just started studying it, understanding it, and we built 204 condos, sold out. I think that thing was like a 54 IRR. It was an incredible execution. And it helped to be in a good market too. But we put a Best Buy and a Container Store and a hardware store in the basement, and we had relationships with all those retailers. And in fact, we actually helped kickstart Container Store's whole business to business model because we
Wow.
called them up and said, "Hey, we want to put alpha closets in our closets." And so they're like, what do you mean?" I said, "I want to buy 200. I want to buy all the closets from you, and I want to give you my CAD files." And so when the condo owner in Unit 305 comes down to your store, you have all their closets on file, and you can build all the snap-ins that you want. We'll put in the starter kit. And what that did, it really allowed us to kind of change, create a unique experience between our customers and our retailers.
I mean, it's pretty incredible hearing you talk about the energy integration and what you guys were able to do from, really from scratch. Your experience was mostly on retail. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. I've I did a little bit of homework and I saw some of the other projects that you guys had worked on and some of what you had described as your I guess motivating force behind it. You expressed a strong commitment to creating spaces that foster connection and a sense of belonging. We see that from what you're sharing with us, but also I know that there's a cultural arts venue you guys had created in one of the projects, and I've heard you say a beautiful line about your goal to create places with a soul that foster a deep sense of belonging, and that's something that definitely resonates deeply with me. Where did that human connection and community centered development come from? Was that something that was influenced just from your childhood? Was that something that came naturally for you?
I think it really comes from my parents. A really good sense of belonging and being part of a community.
Right.
Um, and and I told you the story when I was in college in Boston, and I had a professor who was a developer,
Right.
and we would go look at his projects. And one of the things that always spoke to me is that we who are in the built environment have a responsibility.
Right.
It's not just for returns. It, I really truly believe that corporations' long-term viability is goes beyond your stockholder or
Right.
return on investment. There has to be something of common community benefit, good, that enhances your reason for being. And so we feel that the built environment is needs to be respectful of the fabric that it's around.
Right.
That you can't just think about your boundaries because you are being plugged into a overall fabric, especially when you're building in urban environments. And there's a cultural social relationship between the customer, the resident, the retailer, the merchant, and the community as a whole. So
Right.
there's that contract. So we we just have this deep belief that it is about the soul of the place, and it is about not one size fits all, and that not every neighborhood should or could or wants to be a City Ridge type project. And it's understanding what that property wants to be to really maximize its experience is really our goal. And we have a saying that if you create a place and the community names it and owns and takes it and adopts it as theirs, you
Right.
won. Everyone
Wow.
won, right? We've been to places like that, right? We've been to streets where, we don't care who built it. We don't, but we name it as a place of part of our social fabric. You can take Bethesda Row, which I had the benefit of working on early on, like the first few buildings that were built that Tom Miller built. You once that's owned by the community, you can't fail. It's when you isolate yourself, when you make it hard, when you make it difficult to experience, when you forget that this is a visit. This is someone need,
Right.
people. I worked on a project in Tyson's Corner for Capital One, and we brought in the Performing Arts Center. We had the idea of bringing retail to an office environment. And I remember saying to the executives of Capital One, I said, look, you pay your staff, this is pre-COVID, but you pay your staff and they show up.
Right.
The difference is we're inviting people to come and spend their money
Right.
and stay. And we want them to spend their time here. But they have choices. And if we
Right.
don't make it an environment where it's friendly and they want to come and spend time, and you're focused on what you can do for your employees while they're here, well, I can create a better experience for your employees if I invite the entire community to participate. And it was a struggle because corporate America
Right.
thinks, well,
For
I'm
sure.
just focusing on me. Well, if you're in retail, you can't focus on that. You can't. You'll fail.
100%.
So, anyways, I think it comes from just truly appreciating and valuing the opportunities that we're given. I mean, it's a very fortunate space to be in, to be able to work with creative people, to tap into creative ideas, to bring those things to life. And I think it also comes from the fact that I'm not fearful. And I think that you cannot, if you have a vision, you cannot be stopped at the first blocker. You'll never get to the quarterback. You'll never penetrate the backfield if you're afraid to go out there. And I think that risk taking. We like to do our homework too and make sure that we're not
Right.
making
For sure.
huge mistakes, and we like to question ourselves over and over again. But I believe that anyone who does and tries to create these things that are different and unique, you're leaning into it and you're leaning over, and it's just the reality of the business we're in.
I love that. And I think it's interesting if one believes in the importance of intention, especially when creating. If someone has the intention to bring meaning to this world, versus just maybe more profit-driven intention, this space and this building is going to be here for generations. What type of space is that going to be for generations of people that will be impacted by that positive intention? I mean, it really is a large responsibility, and it's an amazing perspective that you have.
Thank you. And I think other developers and other practitioners share that. I know a lot of architecture firms have that strong belief. But we build things that will outlast us by
Right,
hopefully
right,
by decades, and we're only here on this earth for this short moment.
for sure.
And we stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us, and we are the foundation, hopefully, that people will stand in the future. And so when you take that attitude, or when you work with a historic building, you think like in Shaw, we built this project around an 1881 market. And you think about the craftsmanship that went into that, that building is still contributing to the
Yeah,
neighborhood and to the
yeah,
community after centuries.
pretty
And
wild.
it really moves you, and you have a sense of responsibility. You're not there just to turn a profit. You're there to create an environment, and to also honor what came before you, and also provide something that in the future can build off itself and has maneuverability, and can grow into the neighborhood and be a beacon of positive. So even after we build these things, we don't leave the neighborhood in which we build in. So if we've been in the Shaw community now for over 20 years, and
Wow.
we helped found the Shaw Main Street. We throw festivals and events multiple times a year for the entire community.
That's awesome.
We tell our residents, you live in a historic neighborhood that was one of the first African American neighborhoods created, with an incredible amount of cultural and art, and we want to bring that cultural and art experience back and forth. It's not like it's just in our project. Our property, if you look at it, is really 2 city blocks fully integrated in the neighborhood.
Wow. That's great.
And and once you start to create that, I had an experience. We were building one of the last buildings, and we did a mock-up. And I was walking from the construction trailer, and I was looking at the mock-up, and a gentleman from the neighborhood came up to me, and I really, it was very moving. And he said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, we do these mock-ups so we can understand what the building is going to look like, and we can catch mistakes, and we try to really, hone in on how the materials meet each other." And I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I really like it." And he said, "I have to tell you, Mr. Lake, we see you. The neighborhood sees you, sees what you've done here, sees how much you care." And we started that project construction in 2011. We were coming out of the Great Recession,
Right.
and we had our contractor create a job fair out of the trailer, and they got 1,700 applications from the neighborhood.
Wow.
And 250 of those folks were placed in our property and a project they were building down the street called City Center. And I said, "Well, what about the other 1,500?" And they said, a lot of them really couldn't even fill out their applications, or they failed this test or that test. So we created a jobs training program,
Wow.
and we invited those folks to participate, and even helped a young lady get into NYU. Helped her with her application, and it's that connection to the community in which you work. Is that relationship is so critically important. So one day, it was a beautiful spring day. I'm sitting there. There's lawn chairs out on the street on the corner, and these women in this building next to us, they're sitting watching the construction. I said, "You guys like construction?" And then he said, "No, no, no. You gave our kids jobs. We're making sure they
Wow.
stay." And
That's awesome.
it's that relationship. You can't fake that. That's all part of. People see right through that, and they see if you're real or not. And if you have a genuine sense of community in this business, I think you'll always do better, because the community is actually, if they embrace you, then you win.
That's that's really beautiful. You know, in my tradition, we say that there's different levels of charity one can give. Um, Usually, you know, one starts from inward and goes outward. So if there's someone in one's immediate circle that needs help, that should be the first person they help. And there's different ways of kind of understanding, you know, what's the loftiest way to help another person. But the loftiest way is um, to give another person a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's building them, right? Or you know, for really, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's really developing not just the buildings but the people, where you're
Right.
not taking away their self-esteem. You're actually giving them the confidence and the purpose and the meaning in the community. So I guess in some ways, in addition to building communities, you know, you also have the opportunity to be building people, and I mean that's incredible.
Yeah, like I mean, we say it all the time. We're a people company that happens to build real estate, and we there's just this belief that our we need to cultivate our future. We're going to rely on our future. So there's so many great stories around that about the mentoring programs that we believe in, the careers that we've helped launch in different communities in which we work. We did a project in Tenley where we butt up against Iona, which was a senior service center that was faith-based, created local synagogues and churches came together and created
Wow.
this organization. And I ended up being the president of the board after a while. And we've had someone on the board for 20 years.
Wow. And
Um,
what does Iona do?
so they're a adult day center in addition to providing counseling services to both families, caregivers, and to seniors who are typically at a certain level of dementia or Alzheimer's, and they provide grant-given services, either art therapy, physical therapy, financial governance for people who don't have that. And the whole goal is to enable people to age in place, because studies have shown that people who age in place have better outcomes than if they're institutionalized or if they're having to be relocated into another facility. Sometimes so unfortunately sometimes that has to happen, but the
Right.
longer you put that off, the better the outcomes are for the individual. And so Iona has an army of social workers and caseworkers. We've lobbied Congress to pass laws. We've worked with the city to change the way the pedestrian lights work in the city so seniors have a longer time to get
That's
across
awesome.
the street. It's just changing your perspective again about that other person, seeing the other person and seeing it from their lens. And so it's a wonderful organization that I've been very proud of being involved with. But it gives you a sense that I would not have been involved with them if I didn't build a project next to them, and that's enriched our lives.
For
Is in
sure.
the neighborhoods we come into, we're able to actually participate in their space, and allows us to truly understand the different folks that we get the chance to be part of in
That's really
communities.
special. I'm interested in if you've seen the community involvement from your end and all the investment in the community. Has that translated into strengthening the actual business when it comes to ability to get certain approvals within certain jurisdictions, or whether it's just keeping tenants happier and being able to avoid more tenant turnover and just have greater retention.
I think it's true on all counts. I mean, that it definitely is a strength and enhances our appeal, our ability to enter and come into a community and have trust and build that trust. I mean, imagine, you're coming into a neighborhood and you're going to change it.
Right.
You're creating what you do. Your craft is to change something. That's your craft, and it's a disruptor, and people are uncomfortable with disruption,
For sure.
and you have to own that disruption. You can't come in there and say, "Oh well, it's going to be perfect. There's going to be no noise." No, there's going to
Right.
be there's going to be a disruption. So you build that trust, and having that trust built does allow you to achieve things that others don't, because you're not spending your energy fighting each other. You're not spending your
For sure.
time trying to hide something. You're really truly engaging, and we do get a higher retention. It does. Our properties, our residential properties tend to hover around 65-70%
Wow.
retention, which is typically 45% is the norm.
Wow. It's very
And
significant.
imagine how valuable that is when you're holding on to your tenancy, because you're
Yeah.
holding on to your community, and your culture is now becoming real. Back to our discussion point. We build things, right? People make community.
Right.
And if you can create the place and the space that brings the pride of community, and people want to be part of that community, yeah, you can't help but winning. And so when we get contacted by municipalities and they say, "Geez, we've seen this project and we're really impressed with it. Could you do that here?" Maybe not, because not every property, not every community
Right.
can support that. But we can do something that has that sense of place. So yeah, I think our approach is both beneficial to us in getting entitlements and approvals, but it also helps us during construction,
Right.
and it also helps us with our lease up, and it helps us with our acceptance in the neighborhood. And once you're accepted, like I said, you win. And you can look at City Ridge right now, and it's really funny. It's interesting. You build a building that it's for the last 50 years was Fannie Mae's headquarters,
Right.
and then you do this project, and people go, "What was this building before?" You're like, really? I mean, really? You can't Google, even today, you can't Google Fannie Mae and not have this building pop up. But it's really interesting because
Takes on a
it's
new meaning and a
now,
new life.
yeah, it's got a new life. It's got a new meaning. It's got a new life. And it really is a lesson to us that we think that there's certain things people hold on to, and there's
Right.
some things they do and some things they don't. But it's important to honor what came before you, and then hopefully what comes after you will be an improvement too.
Well, yeah, I love that, and I see that as a general theme in this conversation, and I think it's something that's it's always good to be reminded of. And I think we see a lot now as social media usage is obviously quite prolific. That one can often have the impression that success seems effortless, and it's easy to miss the fact that it takes at times decades for most people to build something that they're truly proud of. Is there any, whether it's professional setback or mistake that you made along the way that sticks out? Everybody makes and everybody has those regrets and mistakes. But is there anyone that you feel sticks out and you processed it a certain way and really learned from it?
Yeah, you know, the we focus on the creation of places because that's the physical manifestation of ideas and vision. Um, the thing that I've learned and probably have stubbed my toe more times than not is the financial arrangement of all your partners and creating that sense of alignment.
Right.
Um, because if you truly have partners who have different goals than you do, when you leave that port and you're trying to get to the next port in safe harbor, and you have partners who told you that this is what they're going to do, but they truly weren't going to do that, or
Right.
you didn't vet that out enough, or come to a more realistic understanding of their goals. That disalignment of relationships is problematic. And if you
For sure.
look at the influence of private equity in our space, it's very incongruent to the development process. It only
Right.
works if you can build something in 3 years, stabilize it in two, sell it before that fund needs the money to be capitalized. Any disruptor to that pattern
Right.
is disastrous. And my partner Todd has a great saying. He says, sometimes these institutional partners catch a cold somewhere else and we get pneumonia and die. um, because we end up being a vehicle. We're just a widget to them.
Right.
We're just a vehicle to a return. And I'm not trying to be disparaging to private equity, but it's that alignment of what we do and getting the right kind of capital in that space, understanding that construction development is messy, and you're going to get thrown a curveball like COVID, and how you manage what you're given and how you manage through those things will determine if you're going to be successful or not. And you need understanding. You need partners who understand that. And if they don't understand that, it's fatal. Projects can fail or not be financially successful even when they're successful, because you have that incongruent relationship between capital and the work you're doing. So I guess my biggest lesson to people is first decide what you want to do, and then try to bring people along with that goal or that activity, and make sure that there's really alignment of interest.
For sure.
Um,
No, I really appreciate that insight. I think in general, I have seen it at times harder to raise equity and connect with partners that are providing equity on longer term holds. And I think, as you mentioned, because the private equity world does not lend itself towards that, maybe more family office space, but at that time, that has its own challenges. Um, but I do think there are groups out there, and when they connect, it's off of the running, because it's just so natural. And when you're on a longer term hold in general, I would assume that there's a little bit um, more flexibility, right? In terms of, you don't need to estimate where capital markets are going to be in 5 years from now, and what the exit cap is going to be, and where rents are going to be, and
mhm.
which are things that are, if not impossible, nearly impossible to accurately predict.
Sure, I think if we all could peg that, we'd be doing something else.
For
You
sure.
know, so you're 100% right. It's when you can find that capital that has aligned with your vision, your goals, and your understanding of the marketplace. Um, it is a beautiful thing, because then you're really everything, all your decision making in your design, because we build buildings to hold. We come into a building, when we into a project, thinking even if we're not going to hold it, even if there's a transaction to be done, we think long term. How's this property going to operate?
Right.
So I'll give you a great, for instance, if you own multifamily, and again, being retail guys, we're like looking at this thing and we're like, this is insane. We're building this building, we're running plumbing all the way through people's homes. We have sprinkler heads in everyone's kitchens, and if there's an accident, the sprinkler head goes off, 65 units get affected. I
Right.
mean, your neighbors just get flooded out, and we're
Right.
like, this is insane. So Brian Corkin in our office, who's been with us for now close to 20 years, he runs our construction development. He developed a system, a passive system, where we capture 90% of the water from an
Wow.
event into a drain in every unit, and we waterproof every through hole to mitigate those disruptions. And again, it costs money in this strive for returns. People would say, well, let's just VE that out, and we're like, no, 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 no. It saves an enormous amount of money and headache. You're not buying hotel rooms for 65
Right.
people. You're not displacing people. You're not
Sure.
reimbursing them for all their damaged material. And I think it's that attitude going into it that creates better property. And again, goes to the same thing with landscaping and how much money you're going to spend on landscaping if you're just going to turn around and sell it. Well, for me, the natural environment, the landscape environment, is critically important to the overall sense of place. And if you own it long term, you'll spend the extra money if that's your attitude. And our approach to architecture is the same. We want to build something that's bold, that's
Right.
unique, that's that is a conversational, that takes risk. Um, because I'm tired of seeing the same old dang thing
Right.
built over and over and over again. Sometimes I see some of these projects like, where do they get these colors? Where do they get these materials? Did they get it from a bargain bin or something? I mean, why are we building these things
The
that just
discount
look,
at Michael's, right?
yeah, it looks like anywhere USA. It's just, why are we doing that? You know, it used to be back in the day, a prominent family would build a building in the
Right.
city as a marker for the family's longevity and their civic pride. Well, those days have come and gone with the influx of the need for transactions, the need
Right.
for cap rate, chasing, and that has delivered worse product. And again, back to our conversation before, is we stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us. What are we leaving the people who are going to stand on our shoulders if we're just building throwaway buildings? If we're just that's all
Right.
we're doing is building something that's a financial execution as opposed to a meaningful execution. And look, our projects have to make money. We're not going to attract capital if it doesn't make money, and we make money, and we get higher rents. Rob Wachowski in our office did a study, and I thought you had this sense intuitively, but he's proven out that our buildings outperform the marketplace by 10 to 12% when they're initially delivered. But over time, our projects produce a higher return, up to 20% different
Wow,
than
that's
its subset,
fantastic.
because how we think about the buildings and the environment in which we create.
I think it's fantastic, and it's not really surprising because I think anybody would put a would put at a very high premium the opportunity to be safe and the opportunity to feel seen and the opportunity to have a community, and I think that's worth a lot more than a few extra bucks in rent. So
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Richard, I want to thank you so much. I feel like, we got into this podcast to discuss real estate and we discussed that, and I feel like we got a lot more than that as well. So this has been so insightful, and it's been great speaking with you and learning from you. So thank you so much for joining me.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.